In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Bless us that the Dharma become the path. Bless us that the path dispel confusion, and bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so first of all, I would like to say Tashi Delek to all of you, my friends in Malaysia, at the PJ Center, my friends at other centers, people whom I haven't yet met at the centers, all of you who are watching otherwise. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share some Dharma with you this afternoon, or this evening for you all, I think. I am very happy to hear that the Tranggu Dharma Society in PJ is organizing a series of online teachings to celebrate Vesak month this year. I think this is a wonderful idea. You've had many great events on Vesak in the past, and so to be able to continue it, even in this time when we have to practice social isolation and so forth, I think is a wonderful idea, and I'm very glad to be able to participate. So I'd like to thank everyone at the Tranggu Dharma Society for the invitation to share some Dharma with you. And the Dharma that I would like to share with you is some teachings by Gampopa. And the reason I thought about these teachings is that starting in a few days, Khenpo Chini will be giving you teachings on the jewel ornament of liberation by Lord Gampopa. And that is a really important text. It's one of our most important texts in the Tokpo Kagyu tradition. So I thought to myself, I ought to do something, give a teaching that matches that will fit with this. And as I was thinking about this, it seemed to me that what might be helpful for you is to maybe if I were to speak on the Dharma talks of Gampopa. So I'd like to go through this collection, or the beginning of this collection, I should say. I'm not going to finish the whole collection in this short time, but I thought I would start to go through the collection, a string of pearls, a collection of Dharma talks by Lord Gampopa Sunam Rinchen. And the reason for doing this is that when we read the jewel ornament of liberation, it's written in a very formal style. It's a wonderful teachings. They're very important teachings. But I thought that if you heard some of the Dharma talks of Gampopa, then you'd have a sense of who Gampopa was, what he was like as a teacher, so far as we can tell. And so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share some of these teachings with you. This last winter, at Tranggu Rinpoche's request, I retranslated these talks into English. There is an earlier translation, although I didn't know that when I started my translation. There was an earlier translation, then I translated them again. And then Rinpoche taught these teachings in his annual teaching in Varanasi, and I found them to be really wonderful teachings to work on as I translated them. And also, when I heard Rinpoche's teachings on them, I felt how special teachings they were. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to share them with you. So before we begin the actual teaching, the first thing we have to do is we have to check our motivations. And so I'd like to ask you to please think to yourself that you are listening to this, not just for any ordinary reason, but because listening to the Dharma helps us become able to practice the Dharma. And that we're practicing the Dharma not just to help ourselves now and in this lifetime, but that we're doing this in order to bring benefit to all sentient beings who have all been our mothers in many lifetimes. And so please listen with this motivation of bodhichitta. So what we are listening to is I'm going to start by reading these talks of Gampopa. I'm going to read them one at a time. And then I'll go through and maybe talk about a few of the points of the talks that I go through. So I'll read the very first talk in the collection first. It begins, I prostrate to the exalted gurus. As for the Dharma, I would like to share with you all. To truly practice Dharma, it is important to first meditate on impermanence. Unless you do so, there is a danger that all the Dharma you practice will aid and abet your wishes for this life. What is the reason, or what is the purpose of meditating on impermanence? It is to turn the mind away from this life. By meditating on impermanence, you know that all phenomena of appearance and existence, samsara and nirvana, are transient, so you will not think of this life. That is why meditating on impermanence is necessary. If it does not turn your mind away from this life, meditating on impermanence is pointless. First meditate on impermanence and turn your mind away from this life. Then meditate on the faults of samsara. You must turn your mind away from samsara in its entirety. So meditate on the faults of samsara, and then meditate on bodhicitta. To meditate on relative bodhicitta, first plant deep in your heart the thought, I shall make all sentient beings happy, free them from suffering, and bring them to perfect Buddhahood. Then make everything you do be for all sentient beings' sake, and do not do anything out of your own self-interest. Rousing the Mahayana attitude and focusing on others' benefit is meditating on relative bodhicitta. To meditate on ultimate bodhicitta, let the mind settle within the nature where all thoughts of apprehender and apprehended, or of self and different, are not inherently established. If you practice like that during all four types of conduct, that is called meditating on ultimate bodhicitta. Practicing in that way will bring realization of ultimate bodhicitta. There is no dharma but that. So that is the first of the talks in Gampopa's collection, The String of Pearls. And it begins, first of all, the whole collection begins with the phrase, I prostrate to the exalted gurus, because it is from the gurus that we receive the Dharma. And because we receive the Dharma from the gurus, without them we would be unable to practice the Dharma. So Gampopa first begins by prostrating to the gurus. And then he begins the actual talk, and as all of the talks, or almost all of the talks in this collection begin, it starts with the phrase, as for the Dharma, I would like to share with you all. And so when I read this phrase, I kind of think about Gampopa, sitting in the monastery in Tibet at Dakhla Gampo, and he's surrounded by his students. So Gampopa went to an empty place, and at Milarepa's instruction, he was told to go to Dakhla Gampo. And he went there, and he established the monastery there. But at first he got there, and it was a big empty place. There was no one around, and he thought to himself, how is this going to work? But eventually, one student appeared, and then the next student appeared, and then more and more students gathered around Gampopa, until eventually he had 16,000 people practicing meditation in the hills around him in Dakhla Gampo. And he had 800 students who were called great meditators. And so there was some number of them who were included among the students who listened to these talks. And so you can think of to yourself, when you hear these talks of Gampopa, you can think about Gampopa sitting in some monastery in Tibet, surrounded by all these great meditators, and he's giving them a Dharma talk. And so what does he say in the Dharma talk? He says, to truly practice Dharma, it is important to first meditate on impermanence. So when we think about all of the different things we can have Dharma talks on, we can think about. The most important thing for us to think about is actually impermanence. Gampopa was giving this talk to all sorts of different meditators, some of whom were on a very high level, people who had mastered or were close to mastering Mahamudra, and yet he chose to speak to them first about impermanence. This is because without thinking about impermanence, there's the danger, as Gampopa says, there is a danger that all the Dharma you practice will aid and abet your wishes for this life. And what this means is that like when we go to our Dharma centers, you come, of course we can't go to the Dharma centers now because of the current situation, but when you think about it, when you come to a Dharma center, and you come and you join a puja, you do your practice, when you study, when you meditate, when you do your pujas at home, why are we doing this? If you're doing it as a way to just make yourself to do something that everyone should do as just a ritual, or if it's just something that you want to do to look good, then it's of course better than not doing anything, but of course that's not really purely doing your Dharma practice. So if we want to try to have our Dharma practice be as beneficial as we can for ourselves in this lifetime, the first thing we have to do is to think about impermanence. So the purpose of meditating on impermanence, as Gampopa says, is to turn the mind away from this lifetime. That's not that this lifetime is necessarily such a horrible thing, especially if we are in a relatively comfortable position. And yet, because often our lifetimes are not so uncomfortable, because they're kind of pleasant, we have nice places to live. When it gets too hot, we can turn on the air conditioner. We can eat durian in the winter. We can have other fruit the rest of the year around. We can do all sorts of wonderful things in this lifetime. And yet, no matter how many wonderful things we do, none of it is going to be as meaningful as what we could do if we were to truly practice the Dharma to the best of our abilities. But if we fake it at the moment, if we think, oh, therefore I'm going to go off and be like Milarepa and go meditate in a cave someplace, then of course it's good to go off and meditate in caves. But if you try to do it too early, then you won't have the strength of meditation, the strength of motivation that really would carry you through when there's a danger that your meditation would not work out as well. You'd go off into a cave and you'd discover it's harder than you think. And then you'd think there's no good about this. And so instead of that happening, instead of it just kind of fizzling out because your motivation isn't strong enough, what's important when we practice the Dharma is we start out with thinking about impermanence, remembering that everything is transient, and so that we don't think about the goals of this lifetime, but instead remember what our goal, that our ultimate goal should be to achieve liberation and omniscience for ourselves and for all sentient beings. And so, as Gampopa says, in a few sentences later, he says, first meditate on impermanence and turn your mind away from this life, and then meditate on the faults of samsara. So we have to remember that everything in this lifetime is impermanent. Everything is going to change, and as it changes, none of it is going to really bring us any benefit. No matter where we are in samsara, it's all by nature suffering. And so for that reason, we have to practice the Dharma that can allow us to transcend that suffering of samsara. So we have to meditate on the faults of samsara. So we can think about, of course, classically in the teachings, it talks about meditating upon the sufferings of the hell realms, suffering on the defects or the problems, the suffering that we'd experience if we were born as an animal. It talks about the suffering that we'd experience as born as a hungry ghost, or as a demigod, or a god, or even as a human. But it's important for us to also think about this in terms of our own lives. We have to recognize that no matter what we do in this lifetime, we can do things that'll make us rich, that'll make us famous, that'll make us prosperous, but none of it will actually have any lasting benefit. Everything we do in this lifetime is fine. There's nothing wrong with being prosperous. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable in this lifetime. And yet, if we are so focused on being comfortable in this lifetime that we forget to think about what's going to come next, and we end up at the time that we're on our deathbed and thinking, oh no, what did I do? Then that's not going to really be able to bring any benefit to us at all. Just merely having comfort doesn't help. We need to have something that's going to bring real benefit, and so we meditate upon the fact that everything is impermanent and that we will everything is impermanent, and the nature of our experiences is suffering. We cannot avoid the suffering of this lifetime. We all of us are experiencing it to a certain degree now in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. It's created a lot of people great economic problems. It's created a lot of people, it's caused a lot of people to fall sick and many to die. Many people are desperately worried. Even if they aren't having any discomfort themselves, they're worried about their family members, or they're worried about their communities. They're worried about what will happen. Even if we have enough money and we're not sick, we're wondering, when can I go back and do the ordinary things of my lifetime? And we have to, at this point, we have to recognize that actually, even if we could go back and do the ordinary things of our lifetime, even if we could go back and continue to go out, go to restaurants, gather with friends, engage in business, or whatever else we do, even if we were to do all of that, all of it at some point is going to come to an end. There's a point where we're going to move on to where we go next, and we need to do something now in order to make sure that when we go on to that next place, that we actually have something good to go on to. We have the basis for going on to something good. As Trungpa Rinpoche often says, we need to make sure that at the point that we pass away, we have something that's going to give us confidence. We have the feeling like, at least I recited some mani mantras, at least I did some practice, at least I was generous, at least I had the motivation of bodhichitta. And so if you devote yourself to Dharma as much as you can, whatever you can manage in your lifetime, and try to keep it in your mind at all times, then at that point it's going to be really beneficial for you. This is why we meditate on the faults of samsara. So as Gampopa says, you must turn your mind away from samsara in its entirety. So meditate on the faults of samsara, and then meditate on bodhicitta. So when we realize that that none of the affairs of samsara, none of the things that we ordinarily do in samsara are going to be able to provide us true and lasting happiness, then we also realize it's going to be the same for all other sentient beings. And so all other sentient beings need someone else who can help them, someone who can bring them benefit in this lifetime and into the future, into their future lifetimes. So then we think, oh, well, how can I do this? And then if you look at the stories of people like Gampopa, or perhaps even more appropriately now, because it's the first day of the Vesak month, the month when the Buddha was born and when he passed to enlightenment, we can also think about the example of our teacher, the Buddha. He was born as a prince. He realized he had all of the comforts of this lifetime. He had a wife, he had a child, he had the pleasures of a palace, he had political power, he had everything that one could want, and yet he realized that none of it was meaningful. He went out, and he then he then followed the spiritual path, and he became a Buddha. And because he became a Buddha, look at what he did for all other sentient beings. We wouldn't, if the Buddha had not done so, if the Buddha had just gone on and become a king, none of us would know his name. No one would know the name Siddhartha Gautama. Everyone would have forgotten about him. He would have had no impact on our lives at all. But because the Buddha did have the idea, I need to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, and he went through through all the practice. He did the meditation. He spent 6 years practicing austerities. He sat under the Bodhi tree. He achieved enlightenment. And because the Buddha did that, we now are able to feel the benefits of what he did. And the main thing that came from is his motivation of bodhicitta. Now you might think to yourself, oh, I'm just an ordinary person. I can't do it. I'm just a regular person. Maybe it's better for me to continue with my business, to continue taking care of my family, to try to do something good in this lifetime. And of course, all of that is fine. But you have to think about, what was the Buddha before he became the Buddha? The Buddha was just a person like you and me. He was an ordinary person. In fact, the story of the time of how the Buddha started on the path toward becoming a Buddha was many, many lifetimes ago, many eons ago, when he was born, a poor Brahmin farmer. So he had nothing of his own. But that at that time there was a Buddha named Shakyamuni, and this poor Brahmin farmer heard of this Buddha and thought to himself, "I'd dearly love to be able to offer this Buddha Shakyamuni a meal, but I have nothing. All I have is a bowl of." It was like kanji, I think. It's hard to tell. In Tibetan, they call it tupa. I think it's basically like rice kanji, or maybe we could say English porridge. I don't know. We could call it gruel. That's all that this poor farmer had for his meal on that day. And he thought to himself, well, the Buddha's going to go off to some rich person's house and not be able to take this, and so I won't be able to make an offering to the Buddha. But the Buddha of that time, who was also called Shakyamuni, knew what he was thinking. And he went to see that poor Brahmin farmer and accepted his offering of this thin gruel. And the farmer was overjoyed, and he made the prayer, "May I be just like you. May I have the same size body, the same lifespan, the same sorts of students, the same way of helping sentient beings. May I even have the same name as you." And it's because that poor Brahmin farmer made that aspiration then that many, many lifetimes later he was able to awaken as a Buddha, and we can still feel the benefit of that. So when you think to yourself, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm just an ordinary person. There's no way I can achieve that benefit," you should remember this story and think to yourself, in fact, if you were to meet that poor Brahmin farmer on the road today, he's a poor person. You might think to themselves, "Oh, he's a little better than a beggar." You might think, nothing special about this person. But because that farmer made that aspiration, he became someone special, and someone who has helped all of us in all of our lifetimes. And so it's important for us to remember we must not get discouraged. We can do it. We can achieve Buddhahood for the sake of sentient beings. So we must meditate on bodhicitta, as Gampopa says. Gampopa then says, to meditate on relative bodhicitta, first deep in your heart, plant deep in your heart the thought, "I shall make all sentient beings happy, free them from suffering, and bring them to perfect Buddhahood." So when we look out and we think about all those sentient beings, we can start with the people who are close to us. If you think about your family, your close friends, the people you love, you want them to be happy. And no matter what happiness we can bring them in this lifetime, we can give them gifts, we can feed them, we can take care of them, we can make sure they're safe, we can make sure that they are practicing social distancing properly and that they aren't going to get sick. And if they do get sick, we can make sure that we take care of them as well as we can. And yet really what we can do best of all for them is help bring them to the state of Buddhahood also. Otherwise, that's the main way that we can really bring lasting benefit to people. So we want to really make them happy, not just temporary happiness, but lasting happiness. The happiness that comes from the peace of mind of enlightenment. And so we want to bring, so think about that. Not only do we want to do this, should we want to do this for the people who are close to us, but we should also think about doing this for all those people who are maybe not so close to us in this lifetime, people we don't know. Not just people, all of the animals, all of the beings of any sort of type. And think to yourself that we're all connected in some way. Maybe in past lives we were all mothers. This is what it says in all the traditional scriptures. Maybe we are all dependent, as all people in this world together, we're all dependent upon each other as different parts of this web of the life. But it's really, we really couldn't live without other sentient beings. They're all crucial for us. And so if we remember all sentient beings, remember how we're connected to them, and think, because this person, this being, this animal, this insect, this fish, because they're doing something good for me, by just doing what they do in the environment, then therefore I also need to repay that kindness and bring them benefit as well. So you have the wish to make all sentient beings happy and free them all from suffering and bring them all to perfect Buddhahood. And then once you have that motivation, you make everything you do be for all sentient beings' sake. Now the motivation doesn't come quickly. It's easy to think to yourselves, I have bodhicitta, and you find that you don't. So you have to train in it over and over again. That's why we begin every practice by taking the bodhisattva vow. It's why we often take the bodhisattva vows, why teachers give the bodhisattva vows many times, why students take the bodhisattva vows all the time, why people recite it at the beginning of all their practices, so that we can remember this motivation. Because frankly, we're ordinary individuals, and this is completely opposite of our ordinary ideas, our ordinary motivations. We have to train in it. We have to fake it till we make it. So you train and you make thinking about it over and over again, remembering that as ordinary sentient beings, of course, we're going to muck up occasionally. But that doesn't mean that you can't keep trying. And so when you do muck up and you're aware of it, then you try again and you think about you try to remember bodhicitta, you try to remember loving kindness and compassion, and you try to make everything you do be for the sake of all sentient beings and not do anything out of your own self-interest. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to start out by being self-sacrificing. What this means is that you have to start out by doing what you can to do more and more. If you feel like if you start out by practicing generosity. And when you're generous at first, you can only give little things. And then you can maybe give more things, and you give larger things. And then you realize that just giving things is not always enough. You can also give people safety. You can give them Dharma teachings and so forth. And then you realize that even that is enough. You need to practice discipline and so forth. And so as you gradually practice, you start with what you can, and then you let your practice grow so that you naturally become more and more able. And as you practice more, then your abilities grow stronger, and then eventually you will get to the point where you will be able to benefit all sentient beings without any concern for yourself. So this is the Mahayana attitude. And when you rouse the Mahayana attitude and focus on others' benefit, that means you think that everything you do is for the benefit of other sentient beings, that means that you're truly meditating on relative bodhicitta. Then we also have to meditate on ultimate bodhicitta. That's the next point that Gampopa talks about. Meditating on ultimate bodhicitta means that we just let our mind settle. As Gampopa says, let the mind settle within the nature where all thoughts of apprehender and apprehended, or self and different, are not inherently established. This means that for a beginning, we just need to let our minds be, let them relax, and then just look to see what our experience is, and not have ideas about what we're seeing or what is seeing, or thinking of ourselves as being one person and other people as being others, being different from ourselves. We need to recognize that we're all interdependent and all connected with each other. And so if we continue to practice this way, no matter what we do, that's meditating on ultimate bodhicitta. And practicing in that way will bring realization of ultimate bodhicitta. There's no dharma but that. So that phrase, the no dharma but that, is the phrase that Gampopa ends all of the teachings in this collection with. It's like this teaching that he's given, although very short, actually contains all of the dharma that we need to practice in a very short and pithy form. So there's no dharma but that. So that was the first of the talks in the collection. And I'd like to now talk about the second talk in the collection. And again, like the first one, I'll read the talk first, and then I'll go back and just talk about a few points in the talk. As for the Dharma I would like to share with you all, at the present time we must reflect a bit. Think to yourself, this life is impermanent. It is like lightning in the sky, bubbles in water, and dew on a blade of grass. You must plant deep in your heart the thought that nothing you have is of any use. Once you have done so, you must practice. To achieve Buddhahood, you need a complete, unmistaken path. What is that complete, unmistaken path? That is what we call it when we have the preparation, main practice, and follow through, when they are all three complete. First, the preparation is the intention of thinking at the outset, I shall make all sentient beings happy, free them from suffering, and bring them to perfect Buddhahood. Then the main practice is to make whatever you do the path of the 6 transcendences. At the very least, when you give something to a beggar, the thing you give is generosity. Giving peacefully is discipline. Not feeling an affliction toward them even if their request is not skillful is patience. Giving readily is diligence. Giving it without distraction and embraced by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta is dhyana, or meditation. Knowing that the beggar, the giver, the thing, and the result are all mere dreams and illusions is prajna. Practice the main path, understanding that it has all 6 transcendences. For the follow-through, stamp it with the seal of not focusing on it as anything at all. Then make everything the path, clear but not established within the nature of equality. In doing so, first mentally embracing it with the thought that it is for being's sake is the Mahayana attitude. You awaken to Buddhahood through the Mahayana. You cannot awaken to even a bit of Buddhahood through the foundation vehicle. Thus, it is important to rouse the Mahayana attitude. The main practice is the complete and unmistaken path of the transcendences. And when the follow-through is imbued with the nectar of freedom from focus, there comes the awareness that everything is like space. By knowing that, you arrive at a point where the imprints are not ingrained in the ground consciousness. Because imprints are not accumulated in the ground, there is no basis for karma. As there is no basis, you no longer follow good and bad karma. At that point, you will not take birth. So exactly that is called Buddhahood. Knowing this is the complete and unmistaken path. If at this time you do not practice the complete and unmistaken path and do not accomplish all your aims, when you lie on your deathbed, sipping a drop of water as your last nourishment and taking your last breath, nothing at all can help you. Thus, from this very moment on, you must put effort into practice and give yourself confidence. There is no dharma but that. So here, what Gampopa is speaking about in this talk is that we have to begin again by thinking about the impermanence of life. As he said, you think to yourself that this life is impermanent. It is like lightning in the sky, bubbles in water, and dew on a blade of grass. You must plant deep in your heart the thought that nothing you have is of any use. Because if you think about it, you may have lots of things. You may have wonderful things. You may have B&Ws. You may have the nicest kitchen knives. You might have the best family. You might have everything you need for this lifetime. And yet, when you pass on from this lifetime, you can't take anything of that with you. But what you can do is what you do with your mind and what you work within your mind. And so for that reason, we need to practice the complete, unmistaken path. That's what Gampopa is speaking about. In order to achieve Buddhahood, you need a complete, unmistaken path, says Gampopa. And so what is that? So the complete and unmistaken path has 3 parts. There is the preparation, the main practice, and the follow-through. These are the 3 parts of the path. So basically, when we think about it, the preparation, the main practice, the follow-through, these are like the 3 parts of a practice. So like when we sit down and we begin a practice, let's say we're going to do a puja, like these days during the pandemic, it's a good idea, as Trungpa Rinpoche has advised, to do medicine Buddha. So if we think about it, we sit down to do the medicine Buddha, and you might start out by reciting the Vajradhara lineage prayer, and then you recite the lineage prayer for the medicine Buddha practice, and then you recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer at the beginning of the medicine Buddha practice. So these are, on an external level, the preparations. And then we have the main practice. So the main practice, then after you've roused bodhicitta, then the main practice is everything from there, starting with the blessing of the offerings at the beginning of the puja, all the way up through reciting the mantra and dissolving that visualization. And then you get to the very end of the practice, and what you do at the end of the practice, you recite the dedications. So the main practice is everything between going for refuge at the beginning and up to the dedications. And then the dedications are what we call here the follow-through. Follow-through because it kind of carries it through. Actually in Tibetan it's kind of like the J, and then it's like the after. That's why I say follow-through. Sometimes it's translated as conclusion. But you have the beginning, the preparation of rousing bodhicitta, you have the actual practice, and you have the follow-through at the end. And so the preparation is the intention of thinking at the outset. I shall make all sentient beings happy, free them from suffering, and bring them to perfect Buddhahood. So what this means is that when we're doing the medicine Buddha practice and you join your palms and you recite refuge and bodhicitta at the same time as you're saying the words with your mouth, you also in your mind need to be thinking about the meaning of the words. May I bring all beings to Buddhahood. All beings are experiencing many different types of suffering. In particular, in this day, we can see the suffering of illness. And so you think about that suffering. And you think that you have to do something that will help free sentient beings from that suffering. Not just now, not just helping now, but also so that they can be freed from it forever. That's the attitude of bodhicitta. We have that thought when we begin the medicine Buddha practice. And then you engage in the actual practice. So that practice of medicine Buddha, it involves generosity, it involves discipline, it involves patience in terms of making sure that you don't get annoyed when you do it. It involves meditation, of course, and diligence, doing it diligent. It involves prajna. It involves all 6 of the transcendences. We've got the 6 transcendences. We've got transcendent generosity, transcendent discipline, transcendent patience, transcendent diligence, transcendent dhyana, and transcendent prajna. So these are the 6 transcendences. And actually, every practice we do, we have to have all 6 of these together. And if we have all 6 of these working together, that means that we're actually truly doing the practice. Otherwise, if you just recite the medicine Buddha practice and you're sitting there and you might even be thinking to yourself you're doing the visualization, but you're not really doing it. If you're not really thinking, you might get distracted, or you might be thinking, I'm doing this so that everyone knows I'm doing it. If you're doing it for some negative reason, or if whatever you're doing it for, then of course doing the medicine Buddha practice is always beneficial to some degree. But if you really want it to be an effective practice, you have to make sure that it has all 6 of these aspects together. So in the text here, of course, Gampopa isn't talking about the medicine Buddha practice. He gives it with the example of generosity. So what he says is like when you give something to a beggar. So there's someone there, like for example, these days, a lot of people have lost their jobs, they've lost work, they need help, and so you go out and you give meals. You give a meal to someone. So giving that meal to someone, that itself is generosity. And when you give that meal, giving it peacefully, he says, giving peacefully is discipline, says Gampopa. So that means that you don't say, there it is, and just throw it at the person. You actually give it nicely and peacefully. That's discipline. Now, sometimes the people who ask you for these things, they're kind of in desperate situations, or they might have their own problems or different difficulties, and they might not ask you in a nice way. And even if they are just obnoxious in the way they ask you, if you still remember, they're sentient beings. They've been my mother in the past. They're just acting this way because they're confused right now, and give it without getting angry. That's patience. And so then giving readily. So that means when you get to them, if you think to yourself, should I give it or not? Should I do it? And you take a long time. I'm going to let them get to the point where they really want it. I'm not going to give it to them quite yet. If you're thinking about it like that way, that's being kind of slow. You actually should be diligent. It's like being eager. Here is someone who needs something. You have that thing that they need, and saying, excellent, I'm excited. I can give them this gift now while I have it, and giving it readily and quickly. That is diligence. And then giving it without distraction and embraced by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta is dhyana. So dhyana here, it's often translated in English as meditation. Actually, because I'm a translator, I have to go on these sidetracks about words. The word dhyana, it's like a particular type of meditation where you can really focus well on what's going on. And when you have dhyana meditation, then you're undistracted. There's nothing that can shake you from what you're thinking about. It's not like our ordinary meditation where we're sitting here, we think for a while, and then all of a sudden what Mingyur Rinpoche calls the monkey mind just starts leaping all around. Instead, being able to really concentrate, doing it without distraction, is dhyana. So when you give that moment, when you are giving that gift to the beggar, you're doing it quickly and you give it, there's that moment, you're giving it to the beggar, and at that point, you are just giving it to the beggar without being distracted from it. That is the dhyana, the meditation. then knowing that the beggar, the giver, the thing, and the result are mere dreams and illusions is prajna. So on a basic point, what this means is that we shouldn't get caught up in thinking to myself, look at a wonderful person, what a wonderful person I am. I'm giving these things. Instead, you realize that this is just all coming together because of causes and conditions. You happen to have the thing you could give. That there is someone there who happened to be able to receive it, who happened to need it. And it all just, everything came together so that you could commit that act of giving right there. But really, it's just like dreams and illusion. There's nothing real about it. There's no substance. It's not like some real thing that's happening. It's just like a dream and illusions. And knowing that is prajna. And so when we do the practice, and we have all 6 of these qualities together, then that practice is the real, genuine, the main practice. That's what we need to try to practice as. In the sutras, this is what we call the armor-like diligence. And what this means is that when we're practicing, it's like we need to wear armor because we're in battle with the afflictions. And when you're in battle with the afflictions, you don't want the afflictions to be able to get to you in any way. You want to make sure that you're completely protected from the afflictions, and so you need armor. And so what is the armor that we need? The armor that we need is the 6 transcendences. We have to have all 6 of the transcendences. If you have, so like for example, if you have generosity and you have diligence, but you have no patience, then everything you do is going to be overcome the next time you get angry. Or if you don't have any discipline, you're just going to destroy everything you do. Or if you refuse to give if you just won't be generous, but you have everything else, then that's also a problem because then you're being stingy. So in order to really overcome the afflictions in battle, we have to wear this armor of all 6 transcendences. And when you have all 6 together, then there's no way that the afflictions can get you. Otherwise, if you're missing one, you're going to be like Achilles, like his mother dipped him in the river so that he would be invincible, but she held him by his heel when she dipped him in, so that when the Trojans shot the arrow, when Paris shot the arrow and caught him in the heel, then Achilles could be killed because he didn't have the armor the real armor over all of them. So it's the same with our practice of the transcendences. It's not just like in the Greek, like the Greek myths and in the Odyssey. It's also in our practice. We have to have all of the transcendences, and when we have them all, then we're going to be able to protect ourselves. We're going to be able to overcome the afflictions in the battle. And then at the end, when you get to the end of the practice, what often happens, especially when you're practicing with Tibetans, is what happens is you get to the dedications and everyone starts putting everything away. They've memorized all the Dharma prayers, so it's okay. And they're already off the throne, off their chairs by the time the dedication is over. And so that's not really actually dedicating anything. That's just like getting ready to go. So what you have to do is at the end of your session, you have to take the time to really think. And and you recite that phrase, Sunam di tamche zikpai ni. By this merit, may we attain omniscience. Think, oh, what I've done now, this is something that is the cause so that in the future I can become a Buddha and defeat the enemy wrongdoing. I can overcome my afflictions. I can overcome my bad karma. And then because of that, I'll be able to free all sentient beings from the ocean of samsara that is churned by the waves of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And so you think to yourself, you think about the meaning as you recite it, as opposed to just quickly running through the words and then hopping up as quickly as you can. And then another thing that's helpful is like when you are done, then you can just sit. Take a moment at the end, after you've done it, take a moment to sit and just rest for a moment so that actually you can let it soak in a little bit. And so in this way, you should have these 3 parts. When you practice, you have to have all 3 parts. You have to have the preparation, the main practice, and the follow-through. So the preparation is the motivation of bodhichitta. The main practice is practicing with all 6 of the transcendences together. Being, in other words, focusing on your practice. When you're doing a practice such as the Medicine Buddha, you've got it all there. You've got the generosity when you're making the offerings. You've got the discipline by doing something that's going to benefit sentient beings, and by holding your vows as you do it. You've got the patience of not feeling anger. You've got the diligence of being excited about being able to do this practice. You have the dhyana of remaining focused on the practice without getting distracted, and maintaining loving kindness and bodhichitta in your mind. And you have the prajna of remembering that it's all like dreams and illusions. That's the main practice. And then you have the follow-through, which is of really reciting the dedication and sealing it with that stamp of the dedication, so that remembering that it's for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so if at that time you do not practice the complete and unmistaken path, and do not accomplish all your aims, when you lie on your deathbed, sipping a drop of water as your last nourishment and taking your last breath, nothing at all can help you. And so if we don't take the opportunity now that we have to practice the Dharma, then in the future, when we come to the end, when we're at our last moment, there is nothing else, nothing that will be able to help us. But if you do, and even if you only do a little bit, as Trungpa Rinpoche often says, even if you only do a little bit, you can use that little bit as something to give you confidence at the time of death. So you can think to yourself, at that time in the future, when I pass away, at least I have done the medicine Buddha practice, recited so many mani mantras or so forth, whatever you've done. But you must take the time now in order to bring benefit to yourselves, so that in the future, when that does happen, that you will have something you could look on and say, I've got this. This is what I have. This is what I can do. We have to use it so that we have to think about, as the Gyalwang Karmapa said in his talk before before one of the prayers, before the third day of prayers for the pandemic to subside. It means that when we think about karmic cause and effect, we're not thinking about the results. What we have to pay attention to are the causes. And the causes are what we do now. So if we take the time to do anything we can to help other people now during this pandemic, to do our Dharma practice, and to become better people, to progress down the path, then that is what in the future will give us assurance that in the future, not only will we be in a good position ourselves in the future, but we'll also continue to be able to help all sentient beings. So I think that is enough for this webcast this afternoon or this evening for you all. So I'd like to thank you all once again for the opportunity to share some Dharma with you. And I would like to now ask that we all think to ourselves truly from the bottom of our hearts that may what we have done by gathering online, each in our own place, gathering together and doing something to celebrate this anniversary of the Buddha's birth and enlightenment, and to think about the Dharma, that may this little bit of virtue we've done bring great benefit to all sentient beings, bring them all to Buddhahood. In particular, in this age, may this benefit may this bring all sentient beings. In particular, may it bring everyone now in this world freedom from illness, freedom from fear, freedom from loss, freedom from deprivation, so that all sentient beings may once again enjoy the happiness of an age of perfection. And in this way, let's now please recite the dedication of merit. O sanam de tam che se bani tobne nye pedranam pam che ne Kegana che balav trobai Sipe tsole drowa drolwar sho. Thank you.